Where is Goma? Have you seen Goma? Chris needs to find Goma. Writing things was important, wasn't it? Nakata asked. Yes, it was. The process of writing was important, even though the finished product is completely meaningless. Hey everybody, today I'm talking about Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. As some of you know, this is part of an ongoing challenge that I've imposed on myself. And it stems from people telling me for years and years and years, dude, you've got to read Haruki Murakami. So here I am, I'm reading every single one of his novels in chronological order of original publication date. So this makes the 9th novel of his in order now, Kafka on the Shore. So next up, I think, is After Dark. And before this one was Sputnik Sweetheart. So you can go and look at my other videos. And I'm trying to challenge myself as a reader to take on something that is massively popular and treat it just as I would the most distinguished of texts of literature and give it balanced criticism and a fair shot, instead of just saying, oh, this is commercial, it's mass entertainment, and just sort of putting that wall up at the beginning. And it's actually been teaching me a lot about myself as a reader. And really, it's fascinating and mind-boggling just how popular Haruki Murakami is. As a small example, I recently saw that Knopf, a major publishing house, is bringing out a hardcover of essays on the t-shirts Haruki Murakami loves. So literally his t-shirt collection. Now, maybe I'm just not in the know and this is something ultra appealing. But when I saw it, I just thought, is this a joke? But it goes to show someone has gotten so massively popular that a major publishing house has determined that, look, even if we publish a hardcover of his t-shirts, people are going to lap this stuff up. But then again, a friend of mine reminded me that here I am savoring a hardcover of Marcel Proust's letters to his neighbor. So what this is in a nutshell, in my opinion, is what I'm going to call a kitchen sink novel. Now, this stems from a local creperie my wife and I love, and they have savory crepes and dessert crepes. And we love to get a crepe, a savory one that is called the kitchen sink. Now, what the kitchen sink is basically once they've got the crepe there on the hot surface, they throw everything in there. And it's very haphazard. They're not trying to layer this on here first, then drop this, line of whatever. It's literally mushrooms, arugula, whatever. They're throwing it all in there, just tossing it up about, rolling it up and serving it to us. And so that's the process that they use. The final product is wrapped up in this nice crepe, and we enjoy it for a short amount of time. And then we always feel miserable after because it fills us up way too much. And nonetheless, we keep going back. And in the same way, I feel like Haruki Murakami here, though it's packaged as this neat novel, and it's one of his most touted books along with the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. It's a kitchen sink novel where he has tried to throw in so much that he can't use it all and can't develop it all. And so many things fall flat that it's hard to really find any traction with the book. Now, part of that, I believe, is the point. In a way, this is sort of an anti-novel. He's kind of parodying novelistic conventions and then throwing them away or throwing dust right in the eyes of them. And, if you know anything about Murakami, you know that ambiguity and plot holes and inconclusiveness, it's part of the game, right? And to a certain level, we have to accept that. because Murakami is who he is. He writes for himself. He doesn't really care what you think. He's said as much in many interviews. And really, the 2019 New Yorker interview has some items that I want to bring attention to as things, sort of axioms that we should take with us into a work by Murakami. About Killing Commendatore, he says, "I had no storyline. I just started from a paragraph or two and kept on writing. The story led me to the end. If you have a plan, if you know the end when you start, it's no fun to write that novel." And this is very common. He goes on to say, "You know, a painter may draw sketches before he starts painting, but I don't. There is a white canvas, I have this paintbrush, and I just paint the picture." And that really shows. That's part of, that haphazard kitchen sink preparation. It really shows that there isn't really a crafted design. Not that there necessarily needs to be, but it's almost like genre automatic writing or something. And he goes on and paints the picture. Now, what's going to happen inevitably if you haven't taken time during those sketches that the masters do, so that you get to rough edges and situations and really think about how to get out of them, those are going to be left in there. And for some people, that's going to be okay. It's almost like you're reading a rough draft, albeit a fairly polished rough draft. So I do question, to what extent it really is just going to work on that canvas, and whatever comes out in the end with all of its mistakes and warts and all, gets published. Readers often tell me there's an unreal world in my work, that the protagonist goes to that world and then comes back to the real world. But I can't always see the borderline between the unreal world and the realistic world. So in many cases, they're mixed up. Now, this is key. In Japan, I think that other world is very close to our real life. And if we decide to go to the other side, it's not so difficult. I get the impression that in the Western world, it isn't so easy to go to the other side. You have to go through some trials to get to the other world. But in Japan, if you want to go there, you just go. So in my stories, if you go down to the bottom of a well, there's another world, and you can't necessarily tell the difference between this side and the other side. So there you have some allusion to the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, and I believe Killing Commendatore. I haven't read that one yet. But those two things are really important to keep in mind. Murakami's writing process, he just goes after it, and he doesn't really know where he's going to go each day. And Kafka on the Shore has tons of commentary from both the narrator in the Nakata sections and from Kafka Tamura in his sections. So it reiterates this in many different variations about not really knowing what you're going to do. I mean, Nakata, who is by deliberate design mentally inhibited, but he constantly says, "I don't really know what's going to happen next. I just know I'm supposed to go to the end of this bridge," or "I know I'm supposed to go to this town. I have no clue what's coming next." This is true for many of the characters. It's very, haphazard and chancy and trial and error. Yet there is a strict determinism that was put into play before all of them. Nonetheless, I think it is important because that distinction is there. And I have to think back to when I used to watch a lot of horror movies. And when I would watch J-horror or Japanese horror movie, it was very true that the two worlds the distinction between them is blurred, versus the more Western mindset where we like these strict delineations. So part of that is a challenge to us. We can't just say, "Oh, he's wrong for doing this," or "This is terrible because of the way he handled this." We do have to consider the origination of these ideas. Some more from that 2019 New Yorker interview that's important. So many writers write small, shallow things in a complicated, difficult style. I think what I want to do is to write serious, complicated, difficult things in a very easy style that is fluid and comfortable to read. In order to write those difficult things, you have to be willing to go down deeper and deeper. So in the 40 years that I've been writing, I have worked out a technique for that. It's like a physical technique, not an intellectual technique. I think if you're a fiction writer and you're too intelligent, you cannot write. But if you're stupid, you cannot write. You have to find a position in between. This is very difficult. Hence the mass appeal, I believe. Murakami is trying to find this road between hyper-intellectuals writing these complex novels, often maximalist novels, and a stupid person who cannot write. And the next question, or a question that follows on the heels of that is, do you think your style comes through in translation, chiefly English translation? And he says, yes, I don't know why. But when I read my books in English, I feel, oh, that is me. The rhythms, the prose style are the same, almost the same. So that sort of heads off any arguments about, well, hold on, what's really lost in translation here? According to Murakami himself, when he reads his work in English, he recognizes himself and says, oh, yes, this is it. This is good. So, what in the world is this surrealistic, metaphysical, complicated, complex kitchen sink novel really about? I'm going to do my level best here from, I wrote out the plot points. And really, I don't think you can spoil this book, so it should be okay. A 15-year-old boy who assumes the name Kafka Tamura runs away from home in search of, well, something. He just knows there's nothing there for him, and the bigger world is calling to him. When he was very young, his mother and his older sister left him and his father behind. His father is a famous sculptor who basically doesn't pay Kafka any attention at all. Back in the days of World War II, a school teacher and her pupils experienced an inexplicable event that leaves one of the kids mentally inhibited for life. There is speculation that the Americans were using some form of biochemical warfare dropped from B-52s. That is one thing that I really wish had been further developed. It was put there, and that is actually based on fact. In fact, Nicholson Baker has just recently come out with a nonfiction book about his research into the Freedom of Information Act, and he researches a lot of this stuff during wartime, a lot of the things that the Japanese themselves accuse the Americans of. This sneaky, secretive biochemical warfare where planes dropped bird feathers with poison gases all over them and wiped out different cities that way and things like that. So, I really liked where Murakami was going with that. Unfortunately, that's one of the things that just kind of dies in place. On the train on his way to the south of Japan, Kafka meets Sakura. This is the typical Murakami young girl who boldly inserts herself right into the male protagonist's life. She gives him her number, and Kafka then, kind of splits ways with her and makes his way to a private library that has, quite a past attached to it. And it is such a Far Eastern mindset that places where grievances took place will continue to have this power. And again, I reach back to such J-horror movies as Ju-on, or what we came to know via Sam Raimi as the Grudge. Nakata. Now, Nakata and Kafka Tamura, what Murakami does is he oscillates or alternates between their two storylines. And if I'm being 100% honest, the Kafka Tamura storylines were extremely interesting and I loved reading them, but the Nakata storylines for me just failed. Crazy things happen, and this is where I go back to something I've said in other Murakami videos, and I do not mean this as a slight in any way. I mean this very sincerely. In general, Murakami strikes me as someone whom, if I had discovered him and started reading him in my late teens or early 20s, I would have probably loved it. But for whatever reason, now I have certain predilections that are hardened, maybe you would say calcified or ossified, but certain things just don't work for me. And the Nakata episodes were really a drag. But Nakata, who we learn this right off the bat, we know this, he's the young boy who was impaired during that school outing back decades before. Now he's an old man. He spends his days having conversations with cats. They talk back and forth naturally, and this gives him a leg up in actually finding cats. So that's sort of what we find him in medias res, is searching for a cat for this family. These factors lead him to an encounter with an entity who operates under the guise of none other than British liquor icon Johnny Walker. Back at the library, Kafka connects with the assistant librarian, Oshima, who helps allow him to live at the library. I mean, naturally, he connects with them. Despite being a 15-year-old runaway, they come up with a way for him to stay in the very room where something many years before took place and will be the key to all of the supernatural elements of the story. He learns of the past. He learns that the library's current owner, Miss Psyche, she noticed that, and I hope I'm pronouncing it properly, and that Murakami meant it, but Miss Psyche. So he actually does a fair bit of wordplay, which may or may not be deliberate. But Miss Psyche, she is the current owner of the library, and back when she was 20 years old or something, she wrote a song called Kafka on the Shore. And there's a painting on the wall, also called Kafka on the Shore. Everything revolves around that. One night, Kafka loses consciousness and comes to with blood all over him. So, of course, he turns to the girl that he met on the train, who allows him to come over. She clothes him, feeds him. She gives him an unasked for sexual favor. You know, it's just this crazy this crazy Murakami character that is in every one of his books. It's so funny. But then again, like he does so many times, he puts some usually young, attractive girl in there like that, and then she just sort of falls off to the wayside. You know, I mean, there is something that has to do with Greek tragedy that I won't go into because I want to, be sensitive to spoilers. But Greek tragedy, very famous Greek tragedy, is the backbone of a lot of what goes on here. And Sakura is part of that. The other thing that irks me is that it's put in your face. It's done so overtly that it sort of puts me off the actual Greek tragedy that Murakami is playing on, as with so many other things that he's pulling on, because he's pulling on many, many different things. He's pulling on stuff from Sophocles, Aristophanes, but it sort of seems insulting to the reader, even the general reader, I would say, to over-explain. And yes, he still bewilders about as much as he over-explains. Nakata decides he needs to leave town and comes together with a truck driver who, just decides to dismiss his job and accompany Nakata on this incoherent and ambiguous quest. Nakata prophesies the weather a couple of times. People are awestruck about it. Talking cats, it's raining fish, leeches are falling from the sky. Amongst many other things, Murakami is also playing on the primitive elements, fire, wind, water, earth. Now Hoshino, the truck driver, falls prey to a figure in the guise of Colonel Sanders. Kafka learns more about the library owner and the writer of Kafka on the Shore, Miss Psyche. Essentially, she wrote the song as a metaphysical castle in which her and her love could remain ensconced and fortified. With the library assistant, Oshima, very bookish Oshima, which is helpful because he helps Kafka learn that he's basically or probably cursed by someone close to him, let's say, into a certain Greek tragedy. And meanwhile, Nakata is led in an entrance stone which connects back to the song, and we get these parallels that start coming into play here. And so the incarnation of that stone appears. I'm trying to skip over some stuff here. Things become extremely metaphorical and metaphysical. We start to realize that metaphor, dreams, these things take shape in both reality and the parallel metaphysical plane. And then Hoshino ends up killing some thing. We think we know what it is. And then Kafka Tamura goes back to Nagoya. Two thoughts once you end this book that I think are very important to consider. Outside of time, we begin to merge with all matter. It's sort of this thing that I'm going to call pancentrism. So instead of the egocentrism that we're locked in now, and our memories are so important to us, and they're only really there because of this delineation between past, present, and future. Outside of that, the reasoning here is that we become sort of pancentric, sort of everything is part of me. And if you can let yourself go and latch onto that thought, I think you'll open up more to this book. Also, words as corrupting meaning. Like I said in my little excerpt at the very beginning of this video, there is a moment toward the end of the book where a character tells another character, like, you get the meaning, don't you? Even though you can't put it into words. And furthermore, sometimes words just full on corrupt meaning. While I do find that true, and this is why oftentimes music is so much more powerful. And even poetry, because it's a more compressed form. So poetry to me is more powerful than prose, and the music is more powerful than both of them. But if you're going to be a novelist, I feel like you have to try to put meaning or communication into language. That's one of the things I think that, Murakami is blowing up, but at the same time, it left me wanting. So to situate us, I drew this little diagram as the story was going on. I'll put it on the screen right now. And as you can see at the top, I've got Nakata there on the far left. And then underneath, I've got Kafka there sort of in the middle. These, again, are the two characters, the two axis points that the book uses to alternate throughout. Nakata, his section is written in the third person. And I think this is because he is almost entirely exterior. Again, the thing that happened to him in childhood has rendered him dumb. He basically says, look, I'm stupid. I can't read or write. I'm pretty helpless. Can't remember things. Can't parse complex arguments. And then below, we see that Kafka, and I think this is done in the first person because Kafka is almost entirely interior. He's extremely bookish. He's a loner. He keeps to himself. But then you'll notice with these dashed lines that I've used, the dashed red lines, Nakata, comes into contact with Johnny Walker / Colonel Sanders, as I'm calling them. I don't think it's any secret or any giveaway. Hoshino is that truck driver that gets connected, comes into contact with Nakata. Now, in the same way, Kafka has this entity, let's say, the boy named Crow. And Crow is what Kafka means in Czech. And this is told to us in the book as well. Then there are these lines you see to Sakura and to Miss Psyche, and they have parts of themselves that are also pointed to these other halves. We see Miss Psyche is pointed to this entity, Kafka on the shore, and then Oshima, the man within, which stems from this really unexpected and abrupt social commentary that Murakami puts in here. Now, the stuff that I've blanked out, not to give away anything of the plot, is interesting. But what I think is taking place in this and why I show that is that you start to see that one of the things that Murakami's bringing in is where Aristophanes, the ancient Greek, gives us that there, for every person, we have lost our other half. And these halves can be female, female, male, female, or male, male. And we're searching for them. And we start to see that almost all the characters are indeed searching for the half that completes them. This book started off with extreme promise for me. For example, if the protagonist in the very opening of the book says, on my 15th birthday, meaning he's talking in the present, I'll run away from home, journey to a far-off town, and live in a corner of a small library. Hey, that's a great hook for me. And in fact, the Kafka Tamura character is extremely bookish and sort of a loner. He says, I'm alone inside the world of the story. And he's talking about the Arabian Nights specifically here, which he's reading in the library. I'm alone inside the world of the story. My favorite feeling in the world. Man, that just, that takes me there. Because that too, that's my favorite feeling. When that moment when you get lost inside of a book. While he's staying at this library, I mean, what he wanted to do comes true. And it says, a deserted library in the morning. There's something about it that really gets to me. All possible words and ideas are there, resting quietly. I want to do what I can to preserve this place, keep it neat and tidy. Sometimes I come to a halt and gaze at all the silent books on the stacks, reach out and touch the spines of a few. Well, that really reached out and touched my spine because I do the same right here in this room. Early morning, late at night, I'll just walk around and just sort of run my fingers along the spines and just muse about what is really here There's this one moment where he sort of is having this little mini crisis, and he says, I suddenly want to read a book, any book. As long as it's shaped like a book and has printing, it's fine by me. I just want to hold a book in my hands, turn the pages, scan the words with my eyes. Man, this character is written for me. Now, this is very humorous and slightly ironic, I feel. The librarian or assistant librarian whom Kafka befriends of that library, the private library, he says, no one comes here to read the latest Stephen King novel. Part of this whole Murakami thing has led me to start reading classics of Japanese literature. I started with Natsume Soseki's Kokoro, and Soseki actually features in here pretty prominently, along with other poets and writers in the Japanese canon, because mainly from Oshima, who has a vast repository of literary knowledge, and that is certainly a delight. One of the things that I think is fairly prevalent in this book is that Murakami really challenges the reader on grounds of imaginative possibility, or let's say imaginative capability. Over and over, I felt like I was being challenged for how much I can really let my guard down and let the borders fade away and just accept whatever happens. But one of the most striking presentations in the book is when a pair of feminists come to the private library there and start ridiculing all the patriarchal or male-centric, phallocentric stuff that's going on, mainly on very, very thin grounds. And the character of Oshima ends up sort of trouncing them and putting them in their place by sort of aping thin rhetorical feminism with the actual complexities of his character. And that leads into this sort of diatribe against what T.S. Eliot called hollow men. And he's talking about how, anybody can be who they want, but, what he despises are people that use really thin arguments and don't really have a lot of substance, and especially don't have a lot of imagination. And so, in a way, I often felt put in my place and again challenged as a reader to expand my mind. At the same time, I also believe that boundaries, borders, constraints are good. For example, look at Blake Crouch's novel, Dark Matter. This is a novel that for me really, really worked, was highly effective. It had moments like those aha moments or those whoa moments, which I never had in Kafka on the Shore. Now, again, maybe that's because I'm reading him too late in my life, or I've absorbed other things like Christopher Nolan's latest movie, Tenet. I just watched not too long ago and then read Kafka on the Shore. I like complex ideas that are presented in a commensurately complex manner versus Murakami's, self-proclaimed ambition to present complex matters in as simplest means as possible. There may be something as too simple or too little borders, because constraint can actually catalyze and foster creativity in a much more powerful and impactful way than just throwing off all constraints altogether. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think.